You've been told racism is getting better, that we're post-racial, that slavery was centuries ago, so it doesn't matter anymore. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful systems of oppression weren't created in the 1800s? They were designed in the last 70 years. What if the stories you learned about progress were carefully crafted to hide the truth? Let me show you what they don't want you to know. Most people think the civil rights movement ended racism in America. Brown versus Board in 1954, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We're taught these were the final victories, that after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination in 1968, America slowly but surely healed its racial wounds. We see the photographs of integrated lunch counters and celebrate how far we've come. But here's the reality nobody talks about. While the language of oppression changed, the systems didn't. In fact, many of the most destructive policies targeting black communities were invented after the civil rights era. They just got better at hiding them. They got smarter, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous because now they could operate in plain sight while everyone believed the war was already won. Lie number 1. Segregation ended in the 1960s. Let's start with the first lie, the one that might shock you the most. You've been told that segregation ended in the 1960s. After Brown versus Board of Education, schools were supposed to integrate. The Supreme Court had spoken. The law was clear. But white communities across America found loopholes immediately. They created private academies overnight. All-white schools funded by taxpayer vouchers and charitable donations. In the South, entire public school systems shut down rather than integrate. Prince Edward County in Virginia closed all its public schools for 5 years. 5 years. Black children went without education while white children attended private academies. This wasn't ancient history. This was the 1960s. By the 1970s, the government introduced a new weapon that didn't require explicit segregation laws. They called it urban renewal, but black communities knew it by another name, Negro removal. Neighborhoods were labeled blighted and bulldozed. Interstate highways were strategically built through thriving black communities, destroying generational wealth and separating families from their schools, churches, and businesses. In Detroit, the construction of Interstate 375 demolished Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, two of the most prosperous black neighborhoods in America. In Los Angeles, Chavez Ravine was emptied to build Dodger Stadium. In Atlanta, entire communities disappeared under concrete and asphalt. Black families fought back. They sued. They protested. They documented the destruction with cameras and testimonies. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. American schools are more segregated today than they were in 1968. Yes, you heard that right, more segregated now than before the Civil Rights Act. Due to housing discrimination, gerrymandered school districts, and the school-to-prison pipeline, black children are more isolated now than they were 60 years ago. According to research from UCLA's Civil Rights Project, the average black student attends a school where only 29% of students are white. Segregation didn't end. It was rebranded as school choice, neighborhood schools, and property tax-funded education. The machinery of separation just became invisible. Lie number 2, the war on drugs was about public safety. Now let's talk about the second lie, one that's destroyed millions of lives. You've been told the war on drugs was about public safety, about protecting American families from the scourge of addiction. In 1971, President Nixon declared drugs public enemy number 1. The media sold it as a moral crusade. Nancy Reagan told children to just say no. Politicians on both sides competed to be tougher on crime. But in 1994, one of Nixon's own advisors, John Ehrlichman, admitted the truth in an interview that should have changed everything. He said, and this is a direct quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be black, but by getting the public to associate black people with heroin, and then criminalizing heroin heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." Read that again. This wasn't conspiracy theory. This was confession. The war on drugs was explicitly designed to criminalize blackness itself. By the 1980s, the Reagan administration supercharged this campaign with mandatory minimum sentences that defy any reasonable definition of justice. Crack cocaine, used predominantly in black communities, carried sentences 100 times harsher than powder cocaine, the drug of choice in white suburban America. 5 grams of crack got you 5 years mandatory. You needed 500 grams of powder cocaine to get the same sentence. The chemical difference between the two, essentially none. The racial demographics of their users, everything. The result was catastrophic and deliberate. Mass incarceration exploded like a bomb in slow motion. In 1970, there were 300,000 people in U.S. prisons. By 2000, there were over 2 million, most of them black and brown men arrested for nonviolent drug offenses. The 13th Amendment, which supposedly abolished slavery, contains a loophole that reads, "except as punishment for a crime." That exception became a gateway for legal slavery to continue under a different name. Prisoners became free labor for corporations making military equipment, furniture, and even lingerie. They work for pennies per hour with no labor protections, no unions, no rights. The war on drugs was never about drugs. It was about control. It was Jim Crow in a prison uniform, and it's still operating at full capacity today. Lie number 3, black wealth inequality is about bad choices. The third lie might be the one you've heard most often. You've been told that black wealth inequality exists because of bad choices, poor financial planning, or cultural problems. Why don't black people just save more, work harder, stop spending on expensive things? But this narrative conveniently ignores centuries of stolen wealth and government-sanctioned terrorism. After the Civil War, newly freed black Americans were promised 40 acres and a mule as reparations for 246 years of unpaid labor that built the entire economy of the South. But President Andrew Johnson, who took office after Lincoln's assassination, reversed the order. The land was seized back and given to former slaveholders. Black families started from less than zero. They started in debt, sharecropping the same land they'd worked as slaves. But some black communities refused to accept this fate. They built their own wealth through determination and genius. Which brings us to June 1, 1921. Greenwood, Oklahoma, nicknamed Black Wall Street, was the wealthiest black community in America. It had thriving businesses, black-owned banks, luxurious hotels, movie theaters, and even black millionaires. On May 31st, a white mob was deputized by the city government and given one mission: destroy Greenwood completely. They didn't just riot. They dropped incendiary bombs from airplanes on American citizens. Over 300 black people were murdered. 10,000 were left homeless. 35 blocks were burned to ash. Bodies were dumped in mass graves in the Arkansas River. And Tulsa wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern. There were dozens of massacres like this across America that have been erased from textbooks. Rosewood, Florida in 1923. Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Elaine, Arkansas in 1919. Every single time black communities built wealth, it was destroyed by white terrorism, often with government approval or participation. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. Banks foreclosed on destroyed properties. The government never compensated survivors or their descendants. This wasn't ancient history. People who survived these massacres lived into the 21st century. Their grandchildren are alive today, still living with the economic consequences of that stolen generational wealth. Today, the median white family has 10 times the wealth of the median black family. That gap didn't happen because of bad choices or poor work ethic. It was engineered through terrorism, discriminatory policy, and outright theft repeated for generations. When you understand this history, the wealth gap stops being a mystery and becomes exactly what it was designed to be: the predictable outcome of centuries of extraction. Lie number 4. Affirmative action gives unfair advantages. The fourth lie is more recent but equally destructive. You've been told that affirmative action gives black people an unfair advantage, that it punishes white people for the sins of the past. Critics claim it's reverse racism, that merit should be the only factor in college admissions and hiring. But this narrative ignores two crucial facts. First, who actually benefited most from affirmative action? The answer might surprise you. White women have been the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action policies, not black people. Between 1970 and 2000, white women's access to higher education and professional jobs skyrocketed thanks to policies designed to help marginalized groups. They broke into law schools, medical schools, and corporate boardrooms using the same programs now being dismantled. Meanwhile, black applicants still face discrimination at every level. Studies consistently show that resumes with black-sounding names like Jamal or Lakeisha receive 50% fewer callbacks than identical resumes with white-sounding names like Greg or Emily. The playing field was never level, not even close. And now in 2023, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action entirely, calling it unfair and unconstitutional. They eliminated the one tool specifically designed to address historical inequality. But legacy admissions, which overwhelmingly benefit wealthy white families whose parents attended elite universities, remain completely untouched. Privilege protects privilege while calling equality unfair. Lie number 5. We live in a post-racial society. Finally, the fifth and perhaps most dangerous lie. We're living in a post-racial society. After Barack Obama's election in 2008, media outlets declared we'd entered post-racial America. Racism was over. We'd moved on. The election of a black president was supposed to be proof that the system works, that anyone can make it if they try hard enough. But something else happened that nobody wanted to talk about. Hate crimes spiked immediately. Voter suppression laws returned with a vengeance after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, declaring that racism was no longer a problem and federal oversight was unnecessary. States immediately introduced strict voter ID laws, closed polling places in black neighborhoods, and purged voter rolls using flimsy pretexts. Then came 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. Millions marched in every state and dozens of countries. The world watched as America confronted its violence. For a brief moment, it seemed like real change was possible, like the nation might finally reckon with its past and present. But within 2 years, over 40 states introduced laws banning critical race theory, a legal framework taught in law schools that most people had never heard of before politicians decided to weaponize it. These laws banned teachers from discussing racism honestly, from teaching about slavery's legacy or systemic discrimination. Books by black authors were pulled from libraries. School boards across America voted to erase uncomfortable truths from curricula. Parents showed up to meetings screaming about history they'd never learned themselves, terrified their children might feel bad about the past. The same systems that oppressed black people for centuries are now banning the teaching of that oppression. If you can control the narrative, you can control the future. And that's exactly what's happening right now in real time in schools across America. Children are being taught a sanitized version of history where slavery was unfortunate but brief, where racism ended with Martin Luther King's dream, where everyone is equal now and discussing inequality is divisive. The truth about power. History isn't just about the past. It's about power. It's about who gets to tell the story and who gets erased from it. Every lie you've been told about racism serves the same purpose, to make you believe the system is fair, that if black people are struggling, it must be their fault. But the truth is, the system was designed to work exactly this way. Slavery didn't end. It evolved into convict leasing and mass incarceration. Segregation didn't end. It was repackaged as school choice and neighborhood schools. Oppression didn't end. It was perfected into policies that don't mention race but devastate black communities with surgical precision. But here's the good news, and you need to hear this. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And once enough people see it, the lies lose their power. The machinery of oppression relies on ignorance, on people believing the myths they've been taught. It requires us to think racism is individual prejudice instead of systemic design. It needs us to believe we're past it so we stop fighting it. So the next time someone tells you racism is in the past, or that we're all equal now, or that black people need to just work harder, remember this. The biggest lie isn't that racism doesn't exist. It's that it ever went away. It just changed its name, put on a suit, and wrote itself into law. And unless we recognize it, unless we name it and dismantle it, it will continue destroying lives while hiding behind the myth of progress. The truth doesn't spread itself. That's our job. That's how we break the cycle. That's how we finally truly move forward.